That's right. Come get triggered. Taming hinders this podcast. Welcome to the podcast. My name's Phil, the host and creator of the podcast. And I got another episode for you. Episode 60. Big number there. Made it to episode 60 here. The topic of discussion today is, I'm just going to rant. I'm going to go on a little rant. Last episode, I did the Waypoint episode. Episode 59 is a great entry point to the podcast. I like to do little entry points every once in a while. I did one back at, what was that? It's been a while. Let's see. It was a while ago. There was episode 42, I think it was. Yeah, episode 42, we did a recap. Episode 59, we did the Waypoint episode. And today's episode is all about history. And I'm going to bitch about some stuff because that's what I'm really good at doing. As always, we'll head over to Merriam-Webster's dictionary to grab the definition of history to start all this off. And I'm going to go on all sorts of different tangents today because, well, it's an important topic. Not only on a personal level, when we talk about our histories and we talk about mental health and self-awareness, we talk about, how do we share our histories with each other? There's a lot going on here. So I want to cover a multitude of topics, but I'm going to start out in the realm of self-awareness, mental health, where I typically talk, and we'll talk about spirituality a little bit as well, because I've been diving more and more into that and what it's all about and how we go about understanding our own. But to start, here we go. History, Merriam-Webster's dictionary. The first number one definition for the noun of history is two words, tale and story. We're going to get into that in a second because I think it's going to shine some light on not only what's happening in modern society, what has happened in modern society, history, but what happens with ourselves and other things. But another one here is, if we go into the second definition, Merriam-Webster's as a noun, history, a chronological record of significant events, such as those affecting a nation or institution, often including an explanation of their causes. So that would be like, as Merriam-Webster say here, an option of that would be the history of Japan, the history of America, those types of things. There's also a treatise presenting systematically related natural phenomena, as of geography, animals, or plants, an account of a patient's medical background, an established record. So we can have the history of something, right? There's the history of you. That would be the second definition here, is the history of you, some sort of definition in that realm. The third definition is a branch of knowledge that records and explains past events. So that's a specific time period history or a specific topic history. Again, this would also cover the history of you, the history of your family, maybe the history of your kids, or your, maybe your significant other's history, or something specifically defined as the history of one thing or topic or subject. We have events that form the subject matter of a history, the events of the past, one that is finished or done for, the actual defining history as of, we can have the history of a person after they pass away. We would, honor their history. We have previous treatment, handling, or experience. That's, a skill. The history of something makes it the skill of it. All of that said, coming back to the very beginning here, we have two words. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines history. The first definition is two words, tale and story. And in our personal story for this episode, here's where things start to get real interesting real quick. So jumping into the definition of what a tale is. A tale, the noun, is a usually imaginative narrative of an event. That's a tale. An intentionally untrue report. That's what a tale is. A series of events or facts told or presented, that would be an account of something, a report of a private or confidential matter, a libelous report or piece of gossip, important word there, libelous. We have a count, a tally, a total, discourse, talk. Remember, I did a discourse episode. So those are tales, right? And tale, as defined here, is a usually imaginative narrative of an event. Now, remember how I classify imagination. Imagination is one of the most important things that we have as humans. It's actually a defining factor of us being humans. The action of magic is to bring things from our imagination into the reality in which we live in. So it's not, I don't think it's a surprise here that imagination would be involved in how we go about explaining things, telling other people things. When we talk about tale, it might have that, usually imaginative narrative or a narrative there, or an intentionally untrue report. We'll talk about the human system and how the mind works and how our system works as far as memory works here in a bit. But I don't think it's far-fetched to say that history, yes, does involve tales. That's how we tell history. Modern history has been told through tales. Even written history, we take something, it's like, oh, we put it into writing. Well, that was really only important when writing was a hard thing to do and not everyone could do. And even then it was important because of the specific class structures in which someone would be able to do that. So we'll get into that in a little bit here if I remember, because there's going to be a lot going on this episode. But let's take that second definition here for the second word, story. So we had tale, now we have story. Story is an account of incidents or events, a statement regarding the facts pertinent to a situation in question, or an anecdote. There's a lot of anecdotal information, right? It's a story. A fictional narrative shorter than a novel is also what we refer to as a short story. The intrigue or plot of a narrative or dramatic work. Interesting, dramatic or narrative work there. That's the intrigue or plot part, is the story part. A widely circulated rumor would be a story. A lie or a falsehood would be a story. A legend or a romance would be a story. A news article or broadcast, also a story. A matter or situation, also a story. And the archaic words that were used is history in the sense of 1 and 3. So we go back to history. The definition here is a tale or a story, or a branch of knowledge that records and explains past events. So when we talk about history, from the very defined point of what the word history is telling us, it's an account that may be true or untrue. We're not really sure. It's just a record of sorts, be it written, unwritten, verbal, nonverbal. We look at the history in the sense of how it's told, right? That's really what this definition is pointing us towards, is how history is told. Now we have schools of knowledge and we have schools of, we'll call them art and action, like things like archaeology, geology, the study of the history of things. And in that we have the scientific method, and the scientific method is how we go about picking out what is plausible, not plausible, and what is fact and probably not fact or not true. So history is just the telling of. There are methods that can be applied to historical record or historical situations that would then give us a better understanding. Now, this is really important, specifically in modern society, because I've said many times on this podcast that history is typically written by the victor and hidden by the loser. Right. So those who have won wars, or those powers that have taken control, they get to write down what's true and untrue in the form of history. Now, the loser will hide what they don't want the winner to know. So we have this purely human tract of, the hot terms nowadays are, misinformation, or what's the science? What's the science say? Well, the science is a fucking action. It's a system of trying to decipher if something's true or untrue, or plausible, not plausible. Typically that starts with a hypothesis. That's where you start the scientific method. You have a question and you have a hypothesis. We don't apply that to news or articles or history. And this is at the broad scale, but again, I wanted to start, let's bring it down into the microcosm of mental health and self-awareness, right? So when we talk about our histories, we have to ask ourselves some very important questions. Are we telling a tale or a story? And how true or untrue is it? It's pretty easy to lie. It really is. We tell white lies all the time, or we tell half truths, or we have a bunch of words for that make up this world of the tales and stories we tell ourselves. In fact, we have a whole rich history of bards and, people who told stories and tales for entertainment. So it's kind of natural in some sense to imagine, to have something like the imagination, and that to take over what we're kind of telling ourselves or telling others. I have for a very long time in my life lied. I used to lie all the time, constantly, because my life was a boring shit show that I either wanted to hide, or I wanted someone else to like me or pay attention to me. So I would give some lavish, important pieces that really weren't quite true, or I would talk something up. It was constant all the time. It was a lot coming from a background of I just wanted someone to pay attention to me. I was a lonely little kid who didn't get a lot of time with friends or family, and I spent a lot of time alone. And back then I really wanted people to pay attention to me. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be popular. Later on, I realized that that was all pointless and I didn't actually care about it. But when I was a little kid, I used to lie all the time. I also used to lie for function, which I think is where people tend to learn how to lie. In fact, lying is an often learned or taught trait. You watch our parents lie, we watch our siblings lie, or our family members. We watch people lie to each other all the time. We make whole stories out of lies. This whole idea of drama, that somebody's comedy, which sometimes comedy in someone's drama and someone's drama is someone's comedy. This idea of these lies that we tell each other back and forth becomes entertaining to us. And a lot of stories that we look at as far as entertainment, being it a Netflix show or a movie or an interesting this or that, is a tale or a story, and often involves lies to bring in drama and intrigue and to get us excited about it. So lies have very much become part of history, or specifically our history. So I wonder what kind of lies are we telling ourselves? And I talked about this a little bit back when I talked about the truth episode back on episode 13, like what's your truth and those types of things. But I didn't quite get into the history of it. And the history of it is, what's your tale or story? Because that's how we define history. So you have to kind of look at, what can I let go? What parts of this story don't need to be applied here? So when we talk about tales and stories, I'm a wonderful weaver of words and magistry, as far as to magistrate over the English language as much as I can. And I'm not the best by far, but I can weave some interesting words and tales together to tell a fantastical story, to intrigue my listeners or those people I might be finding myself talking to in an event or get together, a soiree, if you will, that I must entertain with some revelry of word. And so I am minstrel-like in that sense, or bard-like in that sense, although maybe not bard-like because I don't sing much, but minstrelly. And so in that regard, it's easy to tell fantastical tales or stories. But when we think about ourselves and the everyday actions of going to work, coming home, putting on our basketball shorts and locking the door behind us, or going out to the bar, or going to the grocery store, or all of these little mundane pieces we typically leave out of stories, or we skip over, or just kind of like use an ellipsis to kind of represent, very often used in some classy writing of romance when please insert your understanding here, a nice ellipses of like, and the two lovers went into the back room, ellipses, figure out what happened. Those types of things. We have these fill in the blank moments, right? And so when we talk about history and we talk about our history or our family history, there are much to do with fill in the blank moments, telling a story, telling a tale. And we'll go back to the definitions here. A tale is usually an imaginative narrative of an event. Wouldn't we love to be very important or just to even to ourselves a more exciting life, or a more defined understanding of the I don't know, just everyday activities? Wouldn't that be much better to feel like that's a little bit more entertaining or exciting so that we can get through it a little bit easier? So we use our imagination. That's kind of what we do. Now, that doesn't make it invention, because invention is the use of the imagination to bring it into reality. So maybe it just stays as an imaginative event in our minds. But we have this thing known as language, and we have this thing known as discourse, and we have this thing known as human connections and interactions, which allows the imagination to kind of bleed through into our quote unquote reality. So yes, it's very easy to tell ourselves stories or tales of our history. Even if we've lived through it, we can make it a little bit more exciting, right? We can say like, oh, we can add connotation, we can add depth, and that's always up to the storyteller, always up to the writer. But it's also up to the listener and the reader and the person interacting with the story to add their own connotation. So you might try to convey something using, maybe lavish use of verb and noun and exultory of excitation and those types of things to be a good minstrel of a story. But the reader might just, or the listener might just go, oh, that sounds very quaint or very boring. So it's a back and forth play, and there's a lot to lose in between those things. In fact, humans are really terrible storytellers or tale tellers. Fantastical narratives, absolutely, of fantasy and non-fiction. I'm sorry, of fiction, of telling a story of nonfiction, we tend to add tale and story. We tend to add imaginative narratives. We tend to add intentionally untrue reports just to add some spice in there. We misuse language regularly. It would be really tough for everybody to understand a modicum of the English language and how to use it. We often think of our modern languages as kind of upgrades or, better uses, and that like we have this archaic use of historical languages and the preposterousness of how we used to speak. Well, that's kind of actually bullshit. In fact, history would tell us that the way we used to speak was much more poignant. The fact that we had to use specific verbiage and noun, and you had to learn that, and there was a class structure around the idea of the verbiage, the vernacular you would use to make you not only seem intelligent, but to have intelligent, poignant speak, so that we could decipher what is the connotation, what kind of lies are you trying to tell us. If we look at language, or the way I look at language, language in the Middle Ages, or throughout any historical reference of events, and the way it's written, and the way it's understood, and the way it's portrayed, we give it this kind of airy, like, oh, it's very archaic in the way we used to speak, which is great. But really, if you look a little deeper, I think you would find we would make people speak that way because we're trying to figure out how they're bullshitting us, because everyone was bullshitting everybody all the time. Imagine for a second you lived in a world where, and I'm not stepping very far back here, that there were no paved streets. Everything was dirt, and, people threw excrement and, rotten food, just threw it on the street in some places. And so, no, life was not fun or lavish, but there was a massive disparity even back then between what would be fun and lavish and, just the general everyday street situation. So you would have quite a bit of this word known as animosity. And I might actually do a whole episode on animosity because it's a very interesting word and it's very poignant to today's times. This understanding of this building of animosity that would create a disparity of language. And so you would use a specific vernacular to give an air of an importance, or to help try to find out if someone was bullshitting you or not. And so the history of just language is important just for that particular reason, to figure out, like, was that person bullshitting me? Were they telling the truth? So when we look at the history of ourselves, coming back to the mental health and self-awareness idea, are you telling yourself a story or a tale? Are you telling others a story or a tale? I've had some conversations recently when talking about my history, and I tell it very differently than I might have told it in my teenage, youthful years, or even in my 20s comparatively. I would have, my early 20s specifically, before, 21, 22, before then, into my teenage years, I wanted to be important. I wanted everyone to like me. I wanted to seem important because I came from nothing. I came from, a poor farmer and seamstress. That was my parents. They were a farmer and a seamstress for the most part, a military farmer and a seamstress, and then later cleaned houses. And, so no, they were not of import in that regard. They weren't even fairly well educated. They were high school educated, non-college, hard workers. But I came from a poor family in a very rich area. Poor in that regard, we got by and we ate fairly well, but no, we were not, driving Mercedes and, going to lavish meals out and stuff like that. No, we're just farm kids for the most part. And then as my education started to kick in, but more so my seeking of information, really, I learned that there's all these differences in languages and all these different types of things. So I wanted to make myself seem more important than I was, because that's how I would maybe make it big. I would pull the, wool over the sheep's eyes or something like along those lines. I would find a way to get someone to pay attention to me or notice me, to raise me out of my status. And that's commonality between all sorts of different backgrounds and understandings, historical or not historical, modern society to archaic societies. There was very much of that went around. It's almost ingrained in humanity, this whole understanding of class structure, but it didn't always exist that way. We just see it in the modern history that we tell nowadays. So you have to question this understanding or idea of history, because I used to lie about mine all the time, and I'm sure others have, but now I tell it much different. So going back again to the mental health and self-awareness before I jump off into one of my great rants I'm sure I'll go on in this episode. When we think about our history, and specifically when I think about mine, I used to tell it much different. Now I tell it with very, I want to make it humble statement, but just very like, no, it's not as cool or as fun as it sounds like, in every way, I kind of try to like, just take it all with a grain of salt. Like, yeah, I was a poor kid from a farm. I know it sounds terrible kind of to say this, but like, take it all with a grain of salt. Like, it really just wasn't, because it's coming from my perspective, because it's my history. So I get to write it, right? I get to try to give out the connotation of the narrative. And also I have to understand that people are going to take it differently. There are a great many people out there who understandably hear that I was sexually abused and go, oh my God, that's horrible. And to me, it was just like a minute thing on the scale of the other shit that I dealt with. And like, it's just like and so we have this perspective scale and this connotation scale. And that's why I say depression is so uniquely who you are that no one else can understand. All of these things go into my depression, right? My history makes up part of my depression, part of the way I see things, part of the way I talk about things or understand things is this reference to my history. And I tell it much differently nowadays. I say like, the sexual abuse stuff. Okay. Like, yeah, physical abuse too. There was a little bit of that. And I grew up poor, and it sounds like a tragic backstory for a great side character, like that random character that walks in and makes a quirky remark and everybody kind of laughs at it a little bit more because they're like, oh shit, like no, and hush hush. It's like, oh no, that guy came from like some shit. Like, that's why it's funny. And that kind of just gets passed around in that sense. I'm not a main character here in any way. I don't even know if I really want to be a main character. I think I've done a lot in my life to not stand out, to be a little bit more in the shadows. This podcast is probably one of the biggest things I've ever done to like put myself out into the spotlight a little bit more. And even then I'm kind of like, no. This is more about you than it is about me. I'm just trying to give you my tale, my story. It's very minstrel-like, right? So with that regard, orator-like, I guess, maybe a little bit bard-like anyway. When we look at our histories, I think it's an important topic to come back and say like, well, how do I tell it? And how has that changed, right? So when I look at how I used to talk about my history, I wanted everyone to be like, oh, you poor thing. Let me give you an opportunity. I was trying to use it to my advantage, trying to use my shitty upbringing and shitty lifestyle back then to my advantage, and not use it as a character building exercise. Like, I had a shitty character even with all that background. Like, my character was still pretty shitty. Yeah, I had work ethic and I stayed humble, and I kept it. And even saying stayed humble, I guess is not very humble, but whatever at this point. I tried to keep it very low key, I guess is a better statement. I tried to keep it very low key, but it didn't make my character better. The things that made my character better were the trials and tribulations I threw myself into and then survived, right? So my martial arts training, that was brutal at some points. Gave me great character. Going to work, living out of my car for 9 months to a year, whatever. I think it was around 9 months. Like doing that. I don't say I mean, I might say I was homeless to get the point across, like when people ask me about it, but really I wasn't. I had a car to live in. I had places to shower and eat. I worked in restaurants, so there was always, a quick meal here or there. And I worked constantly. I worked like 70, 80 hour work weeks just to like keep busy, do stuff, save up money to get an apartment. I didn't have a large support structure, that built character. But in the moment, we don't often think about those things of like, oh, well, this is a character building exercise. Other people might say that about it. But eventually I learned to say that about it. And it was a learned thing to go back over my history and be like, you know what? No, that was a really just good character building thing. My point of reference now for connotation is vast. When I talk about duality, and I talked about duality is actually trinity, whereas, it's two sides of the same coin. What are you trying to measure? One, I have quite a few coins in my purse at this point, but also the volume of those coins, the type of those coins, the size of those coins is great. I can measure things quite at a quite large scale. When you ask me what success looks like or what happiness looks like, typically with happiness, I'll just be like, well, it's bullshit. It's a measurement. And in fact, what makes you content can better define what makes you happy. I have fun answers like that because I lived it. And so I have these great measurement skills. And so with this understanding and this talk about history, I think it's a really good idea to check back in and ask yourself, like, how are you telling the tale of yourself? How are you telling the tale of your history? What does it look like? What are you trying to portray with the narrative you're trying to weave or talk? What is in your imagination when you try to, tell people about yourself in that regard? And does it match what you're actually telling yourself? We would love to think that this whole understanding of wishful thinking and I always forget the terms that people use because I just don't pay attention to it because I know it's kind of a little bit BS, but like The Secret and like the wish boards and all of those practices for like positive thinking, positive interaction, and universe will like bring it into fruition. Well, that's all great, but if you don't take the small steps along the way, the story never happens. It's just a tale. Right? So that's the differentiation between tale and story here. When we talk about history, the definition is tale and story, right? That's the first definition Merriam-Webster's gives us. It doesn't give us a broken down contextual understanding. It gives us two words, tale and story. So my challenge is, are you telling a tale or telling a story? And here's the differentiation. A tale is a usually imaginative narrative of an event. An intentionally untrue report. A series of events or facts told or presented, discourse talk, but let's just use those two, right? So a usually imaginative narrative of an event or an intentionally untrue report, a series of events or facts told or presented, a report of private or confidential matter, a libelous report or piece of gossip. So that's a tale, right? So are you telling a tale or are you telling a story? Let's go to story. An account of incidents or events, a statement regarding the facts pertinent to a situation in question, an anecdote, a fictional narrative shorter than a novel, the intrigue or plot of a narrative or dramatic work, a widely circulated rumor. So which are you telling? An account of or imagination of? Are you imagining the narrative or are you telling an account of the narrative? Both could be completely untrue. This history does not make something true. Just telling the history of something doesn't give it fact or fiction. It's simply a telling of either a imaginative narrative or an account of a narrative. The narrative being the tale or the story. It's the way in which we describe things occurred or are occurring or going to occur. But was it imaginative or an account of? Right. So where's the basis for it? If your basis is an imaginative telling, great. I mean, I'm all about imagination. Remember, I tell you that's one of the principal understandings of being human is to have this thing known as imagination, which means you can create magic, which is bringing imagination into reality. But how does that occur? Because that too is history. Anytime we talk about a large historical event that we actually consider quote unquote modern or ancient or pre-civilization history, there has to be some sort of account of it. That's the story of it. But in the moment of it all, there was the tale, right? So we tell the tale of the three warring periods in China. I'm saying that incorrectly, but it doesn't really matter so much as the tale of the three kingdoms. There we go. That's a tale of the history of the Chinese Empire, of these three specific warring families that I believe was the Sun, the Qin, and I apologize, I don't remember the last one. But we have the Three Kingdoms era, Tale of the Three Kingdoms era of China, of these warring families and parties. And it's a amazing tale, absolutely. But, you know, when we get down to the minutia of like the actual story behind it all, there's political intrigue. It's fantastical, right? Great books and plays and historical reenactment even of it all have come out, you know, in modern society. And we tell these great tales of the Three Kingdoms warring period. In Japan, we talk about the unification of Japan, the what would be considered the samurai era of the Edo period, where we had the warring states of Japan, the tale of the warring states period of Japan. And we have both tale and story there. During the moment, it was the tale of. People would tell tales of these fantastical battles. We talk about, in Japanese history, they talk about the Battle of Sekigahara. And it's amazing. It's an amazing battle, just as the political structure and also the way the battleground was defined and how it was used by the different armies and their generals. But also it has been fictionalized into some amazing works of the way they tell it. And with that, we can look at, those are just two examples. There's talking about the tales on the Silk Road of the Ottoman Empire, and also the tales of the Mongol horde, right? We talk about that in history. The Mongols made a huge impact onto history, and that was, you know, not too long ago. I can look it up for you and give it here in a second. But we have all of these, you know, time periods, and there was tale. So typically during the era, there's the tale of it all. And then we have the story of it all. And so that's the imagination piece. Someone in any one of these amazing historical, you know, time periods. So how it's broken out in modern English Western history, and I believe some sort of Eastern history as well, they kind of agree upon this. We have what's known as the ancient world, which was about 3,500 BC to about, you know, 0, or, you know, what would be 180. And then we have the medieval world. It's the medieval time period. So these are just time periods. We have the ancient world, 3,500 BC to about 580. The medieval world, which is about 580 to about 1500 AD. And then we have the modern world, which is 1500 to the present. Which, if you do the math, because we're in 2000, quote unquote, the 2000s, and it goes back to 3,500 BC, that's only 5,500 years of information for as far as historical record. Now they classify it that because that's supposed to be like written history, right? We've found cases of writing well before then. In fact, recently, I believe they found, I don't remember how old it was, but it's somewhere in BC. Let's just use a close number because of the time frame. Had to do with I believe it was the Byzantine Empire, which would have been Mesopotamian era, which is somewhere between 3,500 to 550 BC. So let's just pick a number in between, say it's like 2,000. They had, or someone has recently figured out, and it hasn't completely been verified, but I think it's an interesting understanding that it's possible that some of the writing from the Byzantine Empire actually describes trigonometry, right? And we think of trigonometry to be part of the Greek era, which happened in the 1200 BCs, but it was before then, you know, so it was possible that people understood trigonometry before the Greeks, right? We just referenced the Greeks because they were one of the eras or great civilizations that wrote a lot more and had more historical record. Now, Phil, where are you going with all this? Well, think about that in your daily life, in your personal life, right? It's possible that in your history, childhood you had some great outlooks on things, had some great tales they wanted to tell, right? And the story just kind of, well, did what all great stories do, and it had twists and turns and drama and comedy, and it turned out into where it is now. But it doesn't mean it's the full written history of you. It's just maybe it is just the ancient version of you. Maybe you're moving into the medieval version of you. I believe in my own personal story. I believe I'm finally moving into the medieval me. Although I'd much rather be into the modern me, or other way around. Actually, I would rather have it that there was modern me and then there's medieval me, and I'm moving into ancient me. It's funny that we think about history as far as the civilizations in the world go in one set of terms, but we talk about our lifetimes in a different set of terms. I don't know if you've ever looked at that, but in historical record, we have ancient, which is very old, right? And then we have medieval, which is, a little bit more in between, middle. And then we have modern, which is, current. But when we talk about our historical record of ourselves, our lifetimes, we have what would be youthful, and then we have middle age, which would be that medieval period, very similar. But then we have ancient, which is actually us older, but currently older, right? We talk about ancient past, which is a long time ago, but we talk about ancient us is actually the older version of us. So it's actually moving into the future. So that's why we have sayings like, those who are doomed to repeat history, they're doomed, right? Because they didn't learn from it. So what can we learn from our history? Well, we can learn that there's a tale and a story. So what kind of tales was very imaginative you trying to tell? Did you forget about them? Have you looked back at them? It's an interesting thing to look back at, what the tales you were telling as a child were. Mine were lies. They were lies, and they were deceitful, and they were not very intelligent, but they had some interesting pieces to it. There was this part of me, even in my tales, that kind of wrote the story of me being involved with people. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to, not need people, but people to pay attention for specific reasons. Now people do pay attention to me, apparently. They pay attention to this podcast. They pay attention to me when I speak, or used to speak in public settings. I haven't done that in quite a long time. If you'd like to book me for a speaking engagement, I'm happy to do this. You can find the button on my website at taminghindrances.com/contact. There's a booking button. I would be happy to speak at your event if it's something you feel would benefit you or your audience. Or if you just think it would be fun to have me there, I'm also open to those understandings and attempts at a public speaking event. But, that was being told as very young me because I wanted everyone to like me. I was just going about it wrong. Instead of being a good source of information as far as wisdom and knowledge, and being a very professional individual or high ranking, not ranking, but professionally active individual in my community, or being helpful to my community, which is why I say everyone needs to be of service, to be a good quality service employee to my community, essentially, as the professional setting I provide with my body work, my knowledge of the human body, my knowledge of my philosophy about the human connections of mind, body, and spirit, my understanding of historical background, or, importance of the way we look at information or vernacular, the way we use verbiage, and all of this different information I've collected, my martial arts background, my background in, food and culture, and all of my, understandings that I've built throughout my story so far. The commonality there comes from tales I used to tell. I wanted to be important. I wanted people to like me. I was just going about it the wrong way, which is why I've come up with more modern me has a saying, don't trust the person always seeking your praise or pity. I would have not have trusted young me, now that I know this. I would have not have trusted little me trying to, weasel my way. Not little, I was actually quite rotund back then. Little me trying to get people to like me and get people to pay attention. I was going about it the wrong way. Instead of putting in the effort and putting in the time and, doing the menial tasks to have someone eventually go, oh yeah, all right, this kid's actually a pretty hard worker. I didn't learn that till well into my 20s, that or start practicing that, not to get people to pay attention to me, but just practicing it because it was the right thing to do. It was who I was. There was always the tale of hardworking me. I've always told that tale, that I was a hard worker and I did what I said I was going to do. Even though I was lying a lot, The lies were more to make myself seem more important than I was, or to seem better at something I was. And so instead of getting better at it, not that I didn't do it, I just wasn't getting quite better at it, I would tell tales about how better I was, or, how cool or coof I was. That was all lies. It was all bullshit. But it did build into something. And that's more of the modern story of me, of like, I know it did build some character, right? Even my deceitfulness built character of knowing like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm a liar. I don't want people to think I'm deceitful in those ways. I do want to have credibility because I am a professional, and so I started to let go of those things. And so I wonder, if you looked at your own history, what are the tales little you was telling? And what are the commonalities there that built into the character of the story you tell nowadays? And so we look at tales as the imaginative narrative, and we look at stories as the account of those narratives. What happened? And again, they might not be true, but they do build a picture. And from that picture, we can have a better understanding of our history and how it affects us, and how it drives us or motivates us, or how it demotivates us, what it looks like as far as our depression and how it came about and is built and works. Remember, I can never understand your depression. I will certainly try. And I will certainly make connections, because I believe depression to be the one unique thing that is us, but also uniquely connects us throughout all things, no matter what they are. But again, going back to I can't understand it, I would like to hear the story of it, because that's kind of the important part, is that we share that, we talk about that. And so looking at the tales of you, the narrative, imaginative stories that turned into the story, or is continuing to be the story of you, and what the account of the things that happen look like, even if they are lies, or maybe half truths, or only a modicum of a lie, just like a little white lie or a baby lie. What is the historical record there? Because it makes up your depression. And so if you're going to understand your depression, you need to know where it came from, how it got written the way it is, how it's been manipulated or coerced, or how it has gotten away from you, or how someone else has tried to white out a couple pages and write their own information in. In fact, when we look at the second definition of a tale, we look at an intentionally untrue report, a falsehood. Who's been writing tales about you that you've been accepting? Ooh. Oh no, Phil, what have you done here? I have spun the narrative to make us look at what's really going on. Is your history truly yours? Because as a broad scheme of things, in the macrocosm of it all, the universal macrocosm, as well as the medium macrocosm and the microcosm of macrocosm, I know it's all very unorganized. We are in a situation where we have to come to grips with the understanding that we don't understand history. In fact, it's becoming quite apparent that history is probably a lie, right? A history is a tale of a story. So we have to choose what kind of history we're going to believe. I personally, this is just me, and this does not respond to, this is my own personal beliefs, shouldn't reflect upon anyone I am affiliated with, specifically purebulk.com, whose shirt I happen to be wearing right now. Shout out to Pure Bulk, and also head over to purebulk.com and use the Taming Hindrances coupon code for 10% off. With history, nice plug there, right? As far as history goes, I don't believe the modern history we're told. In fact, I think it's all kind of bullshit. I think we haven't looked hard enough, and we've believed people of quote unquote power because we had nowhere else to look. Now there is this thing known as decentralization, right? The decentralization of power, the decentralization of information. That's what the internet was supposed to bring around. It didn't do a great job of it. Maybe Internet 2.0 or 3.0, Web 3.0 might get us there. We have the dissemination of actual true, not true, I can't even use the word true. We have the dissemination of information, and then we have those individuals who are willing to put in the time and effort to kind of use the scientific method to see if it's true or untrue. So before I go too far into this, right, I want to stick with just the person, right? Your depression. who's been telling tales about you, intentionally untrue reports, that you have written into your history, that you've written into your story, your account of it, right? Has someone given you information about yourself that's just not correct, right? But you wrote it in as being part of the story, the account of, even your account of. Has someone tales their intentionally untrue reports leaked into your account of, your telling of the story? That happened to me in just about every version of my history, my story, up until probably 21, 22, 23, somewhere around there. I was believing lies from my family very regularly. I was telling lies with my family, right? I was telling myself, like, no, they're family and I have to be involved with this. And like, this is my responsibility. Even though it was making me feel like shit, there was sexual abuse from the family side of things. There was just verbal and other abuses. There was so much lies, so much deceit. There was so much coercion. Growing up, there was the whole custody battle, which even there was a lie. It just got weaved into this ridiculous mess. I'll make this very quick, but I think it's very prudent to say, to give an understanding of what I'm talking about here. Not only was the custody battle full of lies, but it was a lie, right? The understanding of why one individual wanted custody over the other was monetarily driven in many ways. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing, because I understand it was probably really expensive. You know, it was probably really expensive for my dad to pay child support. He probably suffered a great deal to do that. And I was being told that sometimes he wasn't paying, and there was other siblings. I had, I think one of my other brothers was young enough at a point that he was also, there would also been child support for that. And, clearly on my mother's side, there had to have been some sort of monetary, understanding of like, well, it's not going to be cheap to raise these kids, so I better fucking get child support. So I'm definitely going to, fight that. And then there was the custody battle of like, when, who got to see when, who, when, how, the why question I've learned to leave out of it, but I'm sure that was in there somewhere. And so there was all the lies about that I didn't really understand, and I was too young to really understand, but no one really even took the time to be like, hey, Phil, there's this separation that's going to occur, and there's this custody thing. And so once that came out, at the time in the court systems, had this gone to court, I was being prepared, almost groomed a little bit, to pick one side or the other, because back then it was pretty well known by most lawyers that if you put the kid on the stand and they say they wanted to live with one side or the other, the judge was going to ask that question. At least the judge was going to be like, well, would you like to live with your mother or like to live with your father? And they would, ask you reasons why. So I was kind of being prepped for, you want to live with dad because of this, or you want to live with mom because of this. And so then there became this coercive fight between, well, we should get him to, you should live with dad because, it's better for you. You should live with mom before, and this is why, or that's why. And nowhere in any of these conversations did anyone actually tell me what happened. That my father decided to cheat on my mother with his business partner. I didn't know that until I was 18, 19, somewhere around there. That's when I actually learned that fact. I think it was like, maybe it was 1920. Doesn't matter. Well, it kind of matters to the story, but like, I didn't know that's what actually happened. I had no idea that my father had cheated on my mother. None. Zero. No one told me. Credit to my mother that she didn't use that as a fucking, firing a bullet in the gun, to seal the deal on that one. Credit to her for that one, but also discredit for not really telling me what happened, because I was angry and I didn't understand, and I took out a lot of my anger on her, and that's not her fault for not telling me. It's my fault for being angry in some ways. But it could have alleviated a lot to be like, oh, wait, my dad cheated on my mom? That's fucked up. I can't be mad at my mom for this shit. Certainly can't be mad at my mom for trying to move on, right? When she got a new boyfriend, and took her a long time to do that, but eventually she did and tried to move on with her life. But like, I got mad at her for that. I never got mad at my father for living with some other woman because there were these lies, these tales that weren't true. And I was letting them being applied to my story, to my account, the way I was telling it. One of my brothers was, a great weaver of tales in some ways. Not really. Most of us knew when he was lying, but he would just lie. And so now there was that whole situation of oh, he would lie. So why shouldn't I not lie? And so then I was telling lies to one side and telling lies to the other side. And then that turned into me telling lies to people at school and friends. And it just became a normal thing to tell a lie, to create a tale to apply to my story. And eventually I started to lose track of whose tale was it? Was it mine or was it someone else's? And so when I look back at the history of me, the account of, there's a lot of tales that weren't mine that I was telling. And so I ask you, when you look back at these things, how many tales, someone else's possibly intentionally untrue reports are recounted in your story? When you tell a story, you're recounting, you're telling an account of. So how many of those are in there? Can you start to filter them out? Can you weed them out a little bit? When I started to do that with myself, it was really a pretty deep way of finding a better understanding of my self-awareness, a better understanding of who I really was, or even what or how I wanted to represent myself as. And so when I tell things about, when I talk about this idea of history, tales and stories, not only from the tale side, but now to the story side, let's move a little bit further. A story is the account of the incidents or events. And we just talked about how you could be recounting or telling stories that aren't true because you're taking someone else's tale for it. You're taking someone else's imaginative narrative and applying it to your history. It doesn't work. And there's corruption and coercion there, and there's disconnect specifically. And there's specifically disconnect when we talk about mental health, because now the mind and body are having a disconnect because they're telling a story that's not true. And or I should say the heart, the connection between mind and body, the heart is having a disconnect because it's not whole. Because the story there is not correct. It's not, and not even correctness, just it's not full, right? It's not full heart. It's not full conversation between the body and the mind. Because there's this disillusion of these tales that were told that just are really not part of the story. They're someone else's. And so the depression isn't whole, and the heart can't be whole if the depression's not whole. Because it's part of the mind. That's mind's understanding. It's mind's translation. So if the mind can't have its depression and can't translate that correctly to the body, or the body back to the mind, then the heart's not full. The connection of mind and body, heart, it can't be full. It can't even really work correctly. Can't have heart. You can't put your heart into something if you don't have a good understanding of it, a good story that involves it. If it's someone else's heart, then it's not yours. And that's a lot what happens with family units, I think. A lot of that happens that way. Even just childhood in general, it's a tough thing to understand or go through in any regard. Even just being shunned or made fun of or picked on, or just that one day you wish someone would have paid attention and they didn't. And so you were just lonely, and the world came crashing down, and you had to learn that it's sorrow and terribleness. And that gets weaved into the story. And so that side of it, then we go to the other side. We have soul, the connection of the mind to the spirit. There's even, I shouldn't say more, but there's plenty that could go on there as well, as far as the historical telling of what your soul inhabits or just defined by that connection between mind and spirit, and how many tales could have been told about that just were intentionally untrue, that just don't add up to your story. And so now you have a heart that can't be full, and you have a soul that's empty. Because the depression, your uniqueness, has been taken away from you. Other people's tales and other people's opinions and other people's ways of telling it were applied to your story, your way you tell it. And so this entire time, I think I must apologize for my action. Not only as a terrible, shitty teenager and youngin', but in this podcast, I've apologized many times because I have to. We have to correct our wrongs. And I was wrong to think that you could not easily, but you could follow along very succinctly with some of the things that I was saying to build more self-awareness and mental health. When now I realize, yes, I've defined the connection between mind and body to be heart, and the connection between mind and spirit to be soul, and the connection between body and spirit to be mind, that I can't still define the connection between heart and soul, because your soul and your heart could be empty due to the fact that your history could have been corrupted or coerced or dissolved or diluted, or any one of these other words that you want to add connotation to, feel free, but could just be a telling of tales, but not really a true or correct or whole story. But very specifically, here's the point to pay attention to, not your story or even your tales, not your history. If your history is not yours, then your depression can't be used correctly, can't be used to better yourself, to understand yourself more, to build more self-awareness, to build more you. Because that's what I want in this world, is I want more you. I hope you want more you, and maybe you don't, but like, we want more you. We, royal we. And so if your history, your tales and stories are not your own, then your depression's not your own. And so you have an empty heart or an empty soul, an empty connection between mind and body, an actually empty connection between mind and spirit. If you have an empty heart and an empty soul, whew, that's rough. Now, luckily, you get to fill those things. But even if they're half full, or maybe a piece of them is missing, even worse, a missing part of my heart, a missing part of my soul, right? These are statements we've used throughout all history, but I don't know if we've quite understood them to what they really could mean. And I say could because this is my own philosophy on things. This is the way I put it. And I'm starting to feel this might be a very important episode that I was not expecting to be this important, because the things I'm coming to conclusiveness with as I tell this story of this episode, of this podcast, of this understanding of mind, body, and spirit, and how your depression is uniquely who you are. It's you. And so this history, this tale and story of you needs to be you, needs to be yours. And so I ask you to take control of it, or at least start to take it back, make it yours, make it what you not necessarily want it to be, but what it actually is when it becomes the substance, the story, the narrative, the tales of you. What is the legend of you? Because that's what a tale is. A tale can also be defined as, a story can also be defined as a legend, and what are the tales? What are the imaginative narratives of who you are? Part of this gets into many things I've talked about in this podcast, as far as kids' imaginations are being stolen away from them regularly. We need to give them back. We need to bolster the understanding of having an imagination. It's an important part of being a human, but also it's an important part of our depressions. And as much as I would like to say that the connection between heart and soul is depression, it's not, because depression is housed in the mind. It is part of the consciousness, in my understanding. It is part of the translation between body and mind and spirit, but not necessarily body and spirit. That is what mind does. So it can't be, if mind is the translation between body and spirit, it can't also be the translation between heart and soul, because heart is the combination of mind and body, soul being the combination of mind and spirit. The translation between those two things, the connection between body and spirit, is mind. So it can't fit on both parts of the ladder, unfortunately. I would really like that to be an understanding, which means in some degree that there must be something that's also mind but not mind, right? There must be something else that serves the purpose of mind, serves the purpose of translation, understanding, depression, but isn't conscious mind. And it's not quite subconscious mind either, because subconscious mind also is in mind of this reality. I'm still searching for that, but I think I've better now defined what I'm looking for, or what we as maybe a society, as a culture here in the West or also in the East have been searching for, and what all great philosophers might have been searching for. And I know that's a big statement to make, but we're constantly searching for this thing, right? We'll just call it a thing. The history of humanity, I might say, as a principality of its history, has been searching for the connection between heart and soul. Because heart and soul are the reference points between the connection of body and spirit, which we call mind. That's our consciousness. Iamblichus writes it as the vehicle for the soul, right? That talking about the body, how the body is the vehicle for the soul. The consciousness, though, is what the spirit places into the body, into the mind, actually. And that I define that whole situation to, be it through the understanding of how Paracelsus writes, or Iamblichus writes, how Aristotle writes, how any number of philosophers, Kant, or psychologists or psychiatrists, when we talk about, I'm always lacking on names because it's not something I really, yes, I use this information, and these people were great writers and great philosophers and those types of things. They're not, I don't know. This whole idea of celebratory ideas or celebrities is not really my thing to do, which is why, I don't even think I'm that special in that sense, because it really, is it that important? I don't know. Anyway, I'm rambling on that subject, but it's hard to explain the understanding of like what these people, I think, we're all kind of commonality like looking for. Like even Hypatia, which is Hypatia of Alexandria, was a Neoplatonist. She was a philosopher, astronomer, a mathematician. She was all of these things. I can't remember her name very often because, I read it and then it was an ad to a piece to a thing. So I'm very terrible with names. I apologize in that sense. And I don't mean to just constantly recount the same individuals, Paracelsus, Iamblichus, Kant. But those are the ones that probably most influenced me, even like, Aristotle or, I'm just blanking on all the Greek philosophers as far as the Stoics. When I talk about these individuals, I'm not just talking about just those. I'm talking about like the group of, and I've read quite a few, and you should too. I think it's a great idea to go read all of these different philosophers who wrote about the different understandings that is possible there, specifically on the German lineage of things. Like there's Hannah Arendt. She's a political philosopher. She's also a survivor of the Holocaust. So, very interesting take on existentialism and totalitarianism. But that's just on the political spectrum of things, right? So there's all of these different levels in history. There you go. There's all this different history of the philosophers out there. There's also individuals who weren't really philosophers who could be considered philosophers, like Vernadsky, who wrote about the biosphere, who had some science background. So anyway, before I go, I could just fall down into that whole trying to cover up for my lack of naming names. I guess I should put it that way. With this reading of all this and searching for all this, I think the commonality there throughout all history, right? All the philosophical works, even the theosophical works. We want to start to bring that into the conversation here of the church and the state and the theosophical viewpoints of different religions and on and on and on and on and it goes, right? When we're looking at all of these things, I personally, this is my philosophy here. When we talk about that, the thing we've been searching for the most, I'd like now to define as the connection between heart and soul. To break it down very succinctly, hopefully, we have the human system, mind, body, and spirit. Mind is the translation between spirit and body. Mind is also the house of depression or ego or I. And depression is uniquely how we see the world. It is what makes you you. No one can quite understand it. We can certainly draw conclusions and commonalities, and we can also try to understand one another. That would be what's known as unity. But depression is uniquely who you are. It's how you uniquely see the world. And so each mind is a fantastically amazing thing for that simple reason, but it's also what uniquely connects us all together. So we have that translation point between body and spirit known as mind. And then we have what that mind makes the connection of. The connection between the body and the mind is heart. That's my word that we use for it. My word I use for it, but also the word we've kind of used throughout history and not specifically just in the English language. There's other words in different languages that make reference to this connection between the body and the mind. And it has a little bit to do with the heart of something, or to put one's heart into the effort, that driving engine of the connection between the body and the mind. That driving engine is the heart in the body. So we say to give heart or put heart into something, or to capture one's heart, or, so it has all of these different uses of verbiage, but I call it that connection of body and mind, because the heart has its own little piece of each. It's just an anatomy and physiological sense. The heart has its own sine wave, has an EKG we can read, the synaptic, not synaptic, I'm sorry, this synovial, doesn't matter. The electrical firing of the heart. So it has its own memory cells and its own nervous system in that sense, an electrical system pulses to make itself beat. But it also has tissue and is, working with the cardiovascular system and all the other systems and providing. So it's very much enriched in that idea to be a connection between things. And that's what the mind is as well. So the connection of mind and body is heart. On the other side, the connection of mind and spirit being your definition of, other, the bioelectrical field of the body, what could involve a etherical or astral body, the senses that we get that we don't quite consider to be senses in the way of the primary senses of the human system, the body itself, sight, sound, hearing, smell, touch. Again, translations between body and spirit body and mind makes up those things. Which is what the mind is processing, but the instinctual or intuitive or what would be the home of the imagination, the ability to imagine, is the connection between us as in the royal us of mind and spirit, right? So this form of imagination we're allowed to have and use. Yeah, we use influence and we use senses, but the imagination is this inventive, creative thing we get to use, and that comes from the connection of mind and spirit. And thus, it is soul. Is the defining word I use there is the soul, because souls have magnitude, right? It has a place in time and space, a measurable function of time and space. Thus, it gives it magnitude. And if something has magnitude, it can be referenced. So the understanding, the translation between spirit and mind becomes soul. It's a way of making spirit into something that has magnitude so that we can reference it and it can be referred to. And so from that understanding, then we would then have some sort of connection between heart and soul. Some sort of connection between the translation and understanding of the human system and those things that make up the way the human system interacts with the universe as a whole, the way the body could talk to the spirit in some way. It can do that through the mind, but the connective understandings would have to have a higher substantiality, right? Heart and soul would also have to have a way to be connected, not just via the mind. Some other factor. I think that's what we chase when we chase spirituality, right? We try to give spirituality this understanding of other or things that we can't possibly fathom or know or understand. We give it historically. Remember, I still have to keep this in the realm of history. Historically, we use theology and philosophy and theosophy to define what that is. We've used words like gods or divination or exaltations, and all of these things have to do with divinity or some other higher power, right? In fact, the word power itself is a good placeholder because it's a measurement structure of like what that could look like. It also gives us words like execrate, which is kind of the opposite of exaltate. The antonym of execrate would be to bless, which is an exaltation factor. Execrate means to declare to be evil or detestable, or to just detest utterly. It also gives us words like censorship, which is a big factor of history. Now, I thought about doing a specific episode on censor, or to be censored, or censorship. The problem with that is just how just charged that is right now, and I don't know if we're ready for that specific realm of things, but we could eventually. Now, there is a difference between censor, C-E-N-S-O-R, versus censor, C-E-N-S-U-R-E. The U-R-E censor is a judgment involving condemnation, theosophy, and those types of things. Again, this is in the realm of that understanding of heart and the connection between heart and soul, right? Would that not be a godly connection? That which connects the soul to the heart. As much as, in the human system that is in some ways mind, this goes beyond the human system, right? Because we're now beyond the idea of what humanity actually is. We're beyond the connection of body and mind and the connection of mind and spirit. Because we know this body can't talk to the spirit. If it could, we wouldn't need mind. And so when we go past that, we're not just looking at spirit, although it's still part of the equation. We're also looking at the animation of the body. Now, in most cases, in a lot of philosophical and also theosophical understandings, that is what is the supplantation of the soul into the body, right? Now, the problem there, I challenge, is that supplantation doesn't occur from the soul is implanted into the body so that the connection of spirit and mind can have an animation, which is to have the function of experience. And I think a lot would agree with that. But the challenge I make there is that the idea of gods, or higher power understanding has nothing to do with the mind. The mind is how we would go about the understanding of what that could be, would be, should be, might be, would be, is, isn't. That's the vernacular of translation, right? So we're talking about translational systems. Is that not really at a functional level what we're doing? The history of humanity is a translational system. The history of you is a translational system. And so I've been challenging in the last 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes or so, your translations of that understanding. Was someone else telling tales that you were telling as stories? Was someone telling a story about you that wasn't actually you, but then you adopted it as your story? It's pretty easy to let that happen. It's pretty easy to just go along with that. That's how, when I talked in the fear episode about predators and prey and how fear is the one thing that works upon predators and prey, that idea of fear, it's easily applied to the understanding of history, tales and stories. That someone could apply fear to corrupt it or coerce it or to make it what they want it to be. In the traditional Chinese arts, specific in medicine also, when we learn Qigong, the Neigong arts, but in the combat system, you learn about this word known as Fat, which is the word reality, right? You also learn that you can apply your reality to someone else. That is the understanding of willpower. In the Western world, we would kind of talk about willpower and how I could apply my willpower against yours. I could apply my mind against your mind. Now, my willpower, my Fat, could be based on my power of understanding between my mind and my spirit, which is my soul, or my heart. I could put my physical effort against yours. And so then I can have a clash of heart and soul. You didn't think I'd bring it around, did you? Here it is. The clash between this understanding, if we look at it from the combative nature, which is usually where I look at things from, we would have the tale and stories of heart versus soul, a battle of wills, a battle of thoughts, a battle of implication of one applying themselves towards another thing. And in that understanding, we have these words that we've used for a very long time, known as censored and to censor. Remember, a censor, S-U-R-E, is a judgment involving commendation, the act of blaming or condemning sternly, an official reprimand. Typically, the archaic uses would be an opinion or a judgment. Those would be passed down by the theosophical understanding, typically used in the religious viewpoint, right? And then we also have censor, C-E-N-S-O-R, a person who supervises conduct and morals, such as an official who examines materials for objectionable matter, to an official, or in the Roman time would have been a magistrate that takes the censor. One of my favorite definitions of censor, C-E-N-S-O-R, is a hypothetical psychic agency that represses unacceptable notions before they reach consciousness. Oh, that's going deep, right? So, one of the definitions here is an official, a censor, was an official, specifically in a time of war, who reads communications, such as letters, and deletes material considered sensitive or harmful. Look at the definitions, please, of when we talk about something being censored or to be censored. But again, I'm trying not to stand on that horse right now. I'm trying not to stand on that soapbox and go too far down that world. I'm probably have to turn that into its own episode. So I have 2 episodes that I have to remember to do: animosity and censors or censorship. But going back to history, really, I gotta keep this back. It's what we started the episode about, talking about history, right? Tales and stories. If we're talking about tales and stories, yes, it is important to talk about these ideas of censorship and how, yes, the winner writes the history and the loser gets to hide it. And imagination comes into the factor. And even this combination between body and spirit, known as the mind, is the house in which all of this happens and is translated. But also there is this thing that the true history of all humanity has been trying to figure out, or maybe knew and forgot, and is now trying to get back to, is a better way to put that. What's the history of the connection between heart and soul? What is your history of heart or soul? What are the tales and stories that you tell or could be told about or should be told about your connection between your body and your mind? What is the history of, or will be the history of, the tales and stories, the history told about your connection between your mind and your spirit, your soul? What would one person say about your heart or your soul? What would you say about your heart and your soul? Now you see the functional representation that all religions and all theosophy and all philosophy have used, that you never had the understanding of. No one in my history, my education, or my learning, or my fundamental representation of trying to find information, no one told me this. And so I don't know if it was hidden necessarily. And in fact, I'm willing to put it out in this episode that I believe this to be one of the hidden secrets, one of the hidden mysteries. Right? I've specifically talked about one for a very long time now, and that's that the universe is constantly seeking balance. That is one of the mysteries of the mystery schools. That is one of the hidden secrets to all existence, is that the universe is constantly seeking balance. It does that asymmetrically. Okay. So maybe it's not a hidden secret that the world is seeking balance. The secret, I guess, there would be that it does it asymmetrically. The universe uses asymmetry to balance things. I am now ready to put forth, deciding right in this very moment to do so, episode 60, History, that one of the hidden histories and one of the hidden truths and one of the hidden mysteries in the mystery schools, in the secret societies, in the societies of general mystery, in the higher powers of governments, and all of these different blah, 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 you name it. One of the secrets there, one of the mysteries, one of the hidden truths is this understanding that is used against people because they don't quite know what someone's talking about when they talk about the stories and tales about your heart and your soul. That it's a battle for your soul. It's a battle for your heart. The corruption of your soul, the corruption of your heart. These things that are used to instill fear, I would like to deliver you out of. I'm using very specific terms there because I'm trying to be quaint. I'm trying to be a little bit memeish. I'm trying to be a little bit minstrelly or bardish, or trying to be a little bit cathartic, actually. I'm always trying to be cathartic in my own representation of this podcast, but that's for myself. But I'm trying to be a little satirical, if you will, with using the idea that I would like to deliver you from the ignorance of not knowing what your heart and soul is to giving you an understanding. Because it's important. Because it can be used against you to tell false history, to tell tales, intentional, untrue tellings, to corrupt your story, your account of. So when we talk about the religious side of things, specifically the organized religious, natures, which I know everyone, I'm sure, is so happy that I bash upon very regularly, but that's how you wear things down and that's how you erode things, is this talk of the war for your soul, to corrupt your soul. Let's use some different verbiage there. In fact, we can use verbiage like what they do, which is, and I'm using royal we, the big parties, the big powers, the big understandings, those who wish they had control over you. They use this understanding of control to control the narrative of your soul, your connection between mind and spirit. And so they have to create this understanding of a god or gods or something that you must be in reverence of, that you must be in exaltation of, that you must bow down to. Their understanding, not yours. I'm not saying it's wrong to have an understanding of a god or gods, or to even worship or to do any of those things. In fact, I believe it's an important part of humanity to have an understanding of what spirit is and to worship and revere and to try to understand what that is. But not a specific person's understanding of, or not a specific organization's understanding of, or even a group or anything like that. No, it must be yours. Or it's not your history. It's not your tales and stories. It's not yours. It's not you. And I want you to be more you. We want more you. Royal we. We want more you. I hope you want more you. That's part of self-awareness. It's part of mental health, is to want more you. For it to be you. To be your soul. Not someone else's. When someone says about the fight for your soul, or that, Jesus died for your soul, or Muhammad understands the connection of your soul, that Allah is the home of your soul, or to talk about that you really maybe don't even have a soul, that the understanding of there could be a corrupt soul, or that a specific god or gods can steal soul or take soul or have soul or be soul. Unless it is your understanding of it that you feel in your soul, feel in your connection between your mind and your spirit, then it's not the correct story. It's not your story, and thus it's not your history. It's not your telling of tales and stories about you and your. If it's not that, it's not correct. And I don't typically put connotation on things, but yes, there is a correctness here. It must be yours. And so you see how the house of an understanding, the house, specifically a house, an encapsulation, enclosure of something, the house of, where it lives, has nothing to do with you. And thus an organized religion has nothing to do with you. Not that you can't believe in what they're saying. If it fits true to you, it fits true to you, but it must be your understanding thereof. And if you haven't read the religious context in the books and understood what they're talking about, then, well, it can't be yours. And so this is what I talk about coercion and corruption as far as big governments and religious orders and secret societies and mystery schools. It's all just been very hidden in this understanding of a fight for your soul and your heart, a fight for the understanding of the connection of mind and spirit and mind and body. And so they have created definitions for what the combination of heart and soul is. That it's something greater that only they can tell you about, that you'll never understand. But you can try. If you listen to what we're saying, you'll find it. And thus, I have not tried to understand it or define it in that realm, because that would mean me creating a religion, creating a theosophy, creating more than just a philosophical attempt. Buddhism has done a great job of kind of leading one into this understanding, but not taking them past heart and soul. I talked about last episode at the very end, about the last hour of the Waypoint episode, about void, which is where my understanding of these things come from. But I don't believe that the connection between the heart and the soul is a void. It's possible that it is, and that it must be filled, and thus it is a void because it is unfilled, and thus the heart and soul must come together to fill some sort of something. If the mind is the home of the soul, the connection between our consciousness and spirit, there must be a home for that mind somewhere other than the body it now inhabits. And that could be the connection between heart and soul. And then I'm just throwing out possible philosophical understandings, anecdotal understandings, tales and stories. But I believe that as a whole, the history of humanity has been searching for that. The specific history which we tell. And so history is a lie. History is just tales and stories of what we're trying to do here, which through definition could be understood as experience. Maybe that's a good word. Who knows? I don't think I would choose that one, but I think it's a decent word for now as a placeholder, that the connection between heart and soul is experience. It doesn't quite fit, isn't quite right. I think it's, again, a good placeholder for now, because we often do try to define experience. That's what we tell stories and tales about, as experiences, right? So it is history, but it's not quite the right fit. It feels good enough for right now. So I'll say, for right now, part of the connection, maybe a piece of the understanding of the connection between heart and soul, maybe experience. But it's like the action of. But the action of what? A fantastical question all of history has been trying to define, and I think is possible that we at one point knew. And so when I look at history nowadays, knowing that my own history, and probably your own history, in some way has been added to, corrupted, whatever word you want to add at this point. I know I use some negative connotation words, but has not been yours or your own, has been your retelling of other people's versions. I think so true is also true to history, is so to history. As a group history, a civilizational history, a humane or humanity history. And we just haven't learned from the past, right? If you haven't learned from the past, you're doomed to repeat it in the present. What history of repeat are we in? What cycle are we in? Remember, everything's cycle. I've defined that once before with chaos, creation, order, and destruction. It's cyclical, right? If we're in this cycle, what part of the cycle are we in? And what part did we forget or miss? And are we in just like some like non-corrective loop, which would be known as order? Are we just ordering things over and over and over again to get a better understanding so that we can destroy it to actually be back to chaos, to be back to infinite possibility? Is that why we keep eliminating the and why question, subjective question, spiritual question? Is that why we keep eliminating possibilities? Is because we're trying to get to the destruction of it all so we can get back to chaos, we can get back to infinite possibility? Is that the necessity of having created world religions and cultural societies? Is to define some sort of methodology to get back to infinite possibility, get back to the thing we've always been looking for, that connection of heart and soul. That some of the greatest minds in history, and also the non-greatest, however you want to measure that, have pondered. Is that not the truest, as of right now, history of humanity? Has not all great civilization and culture tried to represent it in some way, try to find it, define it, understand it, become it? This connection of heart and soul. What is it? Well, I can tell you from what I've divined or gleaned or come to understand, the connection between heart and soul must be something akin to the mind as the connection between body and spirit. Body and spirit can never speak to each other. They can't. They have no way to converse. I will get into that more in a future episode because it has to do with what I talked about last episode and in the Waypoint episode, the very end of it, of this thing known as void. It's about I believe it's about the last half hour to 20 minutes of that episode. Probably the last 15 minutes I really get into it. But there's no way for the body to talk to the spirit. It doesn't functionally have the process to do so. And so it has to go through an intermediary. It has to go through the mind. It has to say, hey, mind, can you tell spirit this for me? And the same thing for the spirit. The spirit goes, hey, mind, I don't have time for this. Can you tell body this? And oftentimes we get the transitory translation And one side picks up on it through that vernacular translation, but the mind doesn't figure it out. So then the body either has to re-signal back to the mind to say, hey, the spirit tried to tell us something. I don't know what it was though. You got to tell me. But I know it tried. I did pick up on that. And so we get the woo-woo stuff that the diviners talk about, that the spiritual people talk about, that they say they get these downloads or they get these feelings that they get. I get the chills up and down my back and down my arms. I get the axial, the goosebump, the chill, this feeling that builds that I'm like, no, I'm on to something, right? I get that. It took me a while to really recognize it and to work with it. And that's intuition and intuitive nature. And that's the other senses of the spirit that do have some sort of translation function. But the translation itself has to go through the mind. It's not that the body can't feel the spirit or interact with the spirit. That's absolutely possible. It's when we talk about auras and we talk about etherical bodies and all these things. It's why we try to understand the spiritual body with the physical body. So there is connection and commonality, but the understanding has to come through the translation of the body to the spirit through the mind, or vice versa, from spirit down to body. Has to go through the mind because neither knows what the other one's fucking talking about. The spirit doesn't know these base functional things as the body. It's base functional. It's its own weird collaboration of cells and organisms, trillions of them, that come together to create these vessels that the spirit was like, well, I'm going to throw a soul in there, which is my connection to that mind thing there. I'm going to put that in there and the body that'll figure it out, right? To give you a representative understanding of that, just as a story, a narrative, right? The body being trillions of cells and bacteria all doing one thing, living, right? They're all doing their functions to live. It's the house in which we live in. We're these amazing coral reefs that just get to walk around and exist. Is no different than if we want to go out to the spiritual level to give a reference of no difference, a scale, to go out to the spiritual level, of the spiritual level possibly being on the vastness of all of the different frequencies, the infinite amount of frequencies that could possibly exist in the universe for every functional idea of understanding that goes out to the void. That's massive scale, right? So is the body to the body. And so they don't have a method to talk to one another directly because there's no Rosetta Stone for that. But the body being the body and the spirit being the spirit figured one out. We call it the mind. So when the spirit needs the body to understand something, it tells the mind. And sometimes the mind doesn't pick up on it because even there can be some disconnect. We can have an empty soul, right? Or half full, or however you want to describe it. And so the translation might come down, but the body doesn't know how to translate it. It does know that there was a conversation, though. It does know that there was some sort of connection. So a diviner or a spiritual person or someone working in the woo-woo world of all of those different amazing things like tarot and divination, and even spiritual leaders in religious, organizations, can have that some sort of feeling in the body. The body just doesn't know what that is. There's no way for them to discuss like, hey, I got this. That means you need this. Okay, I'll tell the mind that. No, because the mind's barely paying attention to what the body's telling it on a regular basis. But anyway, before I go too far into that whole tract of things, on that same scale, right, we also have heart and soul. Stepping up from the connection between the body and the mind, its translational functions go through heart. The way the body has a conversation with the mind is through the heart. That connection, right? That's what we call it, to have heart, to put effort in, to have an understanding of the complexity of the heart is the body's piece, that it's its. It's not ours. The heart isn't the mind's. It's not the consciousnesses. We can't sit there and go, okay, beat, stop beating, beat harder, beat faster. We can put inputs in that might create that function, or slow down or, rest. We definitely have mental capacities to have that conversation, meditation, exercise. We can ask the body to do things to have that conversation through the heart. Speeding up, slowing down, beating harder, beating softer. And thus the heart can also tell us things back the other way. It can say, whoa, you're pushing me a little too hard. I'm getting a little too rate. My heart's getting a little too up there. Okay. Or it can say like, hey, there's something going on, palpitation. So there is a way to connect back and forth for that. But the heart is just the representation of all of those different conversations that the body's trying to have with us. But the heart is the representation that it's the body's. It's not ours. It's not our heart. It's the body's heart. We don't have full control over it because we're not ready for that. We still need that intermediary of, okay, the body gets its heart and we can have a conversation with it. And thus that's the connection between body and mind, is the fact that we do give the body the control of the heart. Just like the spirit gave the mind control over the body, we gave the body control over the heart. And so going the other way, stepping the other direction for soul, the soul is the thing the mind doesn't get to control. It left control with spirit. But we can interact through it. And so these connective pieces get put into play. Now, on the other side of that equation, this is what I'm getting at with the whole history of humanity and what we're trying to figure out and what we've always tried to chase after and maybe in some way once knew, I have either forgotten or hidden, is this thing, I'm placeholding with the idea of experience. Is if we left control of the heart with the body and we left control of the soul with the spirit, what is those two connections? What does that look like? What did those two things leave control to? Was it experience? What does it create? What does it order? What does it destroy? What chaos is it? What are its cyclical factors? What are its primordial understandings? Because experience has that methodology, but it's, again, just a placeholder, not quite there. But I will say, in all of that, history of it all, right? We've been trying to figure that out for a really long time. And we've done some great things and some terrible things to do it. So before I go too farther on that, I know I'm losing it just a little bit, so I'm going to let it go for now. As sometimes we must. Sometimes we have to put down the pen. Sometimes we have to stop writing the story. Sometimes we have to step aside or step away and come back to later. Sometimes we need to reread or rewrite the history of it all to better understand the narratives we're trying to talk about, to tell, the tales and the stories of ourselves, for ourselves. So please ponder your tales and your stories. Ponder your history. Make sure it's yours, please. Try to pick out the pieces that weren't. Get rid of them. Rewrite them. Readjust or re-bring them in. Write a different book. Put them in a different bound edition. Make some corrections. Ponder on your connection between your heart and your soul. And that they're yours. They're yours down to the degree that your depression is your mind's, your heart is your body's, and your soul is your spirit's. And so the house of those things, the house of the next step up, is the heart, the depression, and the soul. I've been waiting a really long time to put that conclusion together, that there is some intermediary between those two things, heart and soul. It's not mind, because mind is the connection between body and spirit. The higher functions of the understandings of these things are the connection between body and mind is heart, and the connection between spirit and mind is soul. But what translates well between the heart and the soul is depression. It's the higher function of mind. It's the higher function of consciousness. Depression. And so the historical tale is that connection. The historical secret, the mystical thing that we've been throwing around in secret societies and mystery schools and higher government powers and these vast arrays of wealthy individuals out there who get to have these secret conversations of maybe possibly hidden histories and understandings, is that there is heart and soul, and there's this conversation of filling them or describing them. And what those things talk about are the connections between the human system pieces. And so we work with these Trinity ideas. And so the coin, the measurement between body and spirit, its history, its tales and stories, is the mind. And the better interplay of connections from those are heart, depression, and soul. And so the higher level of body is to speak of the heart, its connection between mind and body. And thus, it is the conversation between the heart and the depression. And higher level of the conversation between body and mind is soul. And its conversion or conversation or translation, its vernacular system that it uses to talk to the heart, is depression. And so we have we have body, mind, and spirit. We have heart, depression, and soul. What is, this is one of the great questions, or some of the great questions that I believe have led to the mystery schools, led to secret societies, led to the Atlantean mysteries, or stories thereof, led to religions being born, led to civilizations being put together, group understandings of, led to war and to terrible things, but also led to great things of industry and revolution and golden ages, and both sides led to the cyclical understanding that we're in, is that we now must upgrade that understanding one more time. It's what we've been trying to do for so long. And again, maybe we're just chasing the history because the history had become tales that weren't our own, stories that weren't our own. And we're trying to get back to what those really were, just like we should do with ourselves. And so the step above is to talk about what the connection between depression and heart is, and what the connection between depression and soul is. And it might be, specifically when we're talking about the ideas of reincarnation, be it reincarnation into another human physical life, be it reincarnation into the heaven of our understanding, or the hell of our understanding, depending on what functionality you believe in there, or non-existence, if you want to believe that that's just that's what you reincarnate into. Reincarnation incorporates all of those things. I hope I kind of explained that in the reincarnation episode. If I did not, again, I have failed you and I apologize. But what is those higher understandings? The translation between heart and depression, the translation between soul and depression. So what is the connection between using the bottom to work up? What is the connection between heart and depression that is still in control of the heart? I have some thoughts and ideas. I'm not quite ready to share them, but I have some thoughts and ideas there. And then to the other side, what is the connection between the depression and the soul that is also that is in control? I'm sorry, that the soul has control of, that the depression is not. that we've left it with those control structures. Because when we figure out that subset, right, when we figure out what those two things are, we can go through the almost algebraic equation to move the understanding of the mind, the consciousness, that in which we are existent in, from mind to depression to whatever its higher form might be. And that is something I believe to be great. So great that entire schools of thought and thinking and understanding have been built and predicated on the idea that that is the historical reference for which we are seeking or have lost. But we can start with doing that inside of ourselves. Looking at our history, looking at the tales and the stories that have been told, will be told, or should be told. To roll our D20 for initiative, to get ready to have our adventures, to tell the revelry tales of what occurred or happened or will or could. To have wonderful stories, to have wonderful tales. To modify those that have been told if they do not currently fit the apparatus in which we exist, that in which is of our minds. Us, but also you and yours. So please take some time to look back at your history. Tell your tales, tell your story. To yourself, for yourself, of yourself. And I will continue to ponder on these connections that I try to philosophically figure out in some weird, obtuse way. And hopefully eventually one day I'll have an answer, or we will get closer together. Because that's the next step on the journey. As we make these connections, we must also to connect our histories and find out what they really are. I will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much for listening. As always, please go check out taminghindrances.com. Check out the archive. If you would like me to speak at an event that you're holding or to book me for some sort of event, please send me a message with the booking. If you just want to tell me something, tell me I'm an idiot. If you really feel like it, you can do it on the review page, review on the contact form. On the contact page, there's a review form. There's also just a general contact form. Happy to hear from you if you'd like. Please check out taminghindrances.com reviews. I have some reviews on some products there, or just head over to purebulk.com and get yourself some sweet supplements. I highly recommend getting into the fall season or any really time of year. Their immune support supplement is amazing. Cliff High's Pure Sleep is great for getting good sleep, a very important thing if we're to continue having a good understanding of our history, to have good recollection, clean mind states. All of those things and more. And I'll see you on the next one. Happy history.